Welcome back. You're listening to Jason Lee Willis's Examining Moses series. Today's episode, Moses the Caveman. Now, we left off with Moses at the age of 40, going into exile. According to Exodus 2, Moses settled in the land of Midian, which most scholars place in the northwest corner of the Arabian Peninsula, along the eastern shore of the Red Sea. Even by the 18th dynasty, the Sinai Peninsula had been utilized by the Egyptians for mining precious jewels, so Moses knew he would have bumped into Egyptian workers. Remember, Horemheb would have seen him as a threat as well as a criminal, so assassins seem par for the course. Knowing this, Moses chose to go to a land of nomads, cut off from society. Jewish historian Josephus adds some interesting details to the tale. In his account, there was clear animosity between Moses and Pharaoh, who I assume to be Horemheb. So when Moses left Thebes to visit the land of Goshen, his purpose was to, quote, raise a sedition, and, quote, bring innovations into Egypt. In other words, after destroying the Deltan dynasty, Pharaoh Horemheb worried that Moses would scheme to have the Ethiopians and Hebrews rise up against him. So Pharaoh Horemheb was, quote, envious of Moses and plotted to kill him. Josephus makes no mention of Moses murdering an Egyptian worker, but instead, Moses learns he is about to be assassinated. So he went, quote, where his enemies could not suspect he would travel, Midian. Josephus does have the story of the well, and in the familiarity of the shared stories, I almost missed a couple very cool details. First, Midian is described as the land of Keturah, and is clearly described as being upon the Red Sea. But when introducing Zipporah and the sisters, he describes the scene by saying what they were doing was, quote, customary and very familiar for women to do in the country of the troglodytes. Huh? Captain Caveman. Growing up in the 20th century, I had the social context of Neanderthals, 2001 A Space Odyssey, the Jimmy Castor Bunch's Troglodytes, a band called the Trogs, and a club-wielding furball on Saturday morning cartoons. But the ancient definition of a caveman is far different than the modern context. 2,000 years ago, historians wrote about a real group of people, which they called the Troglodytae. Trogle is the root for the word cave, and dites is a word that means divers. Together, they were the cave divers. Now, based on a description and chronology, these cave divers are not the same as those folks who decorated a few caves with animal graffiti. But these troglodytes are still quite fascinating. First, they are not creatures of mythology. In fact, they are referenced by famous historians Pliny, Strabo, Josephus, Tacitus, Herodotus, Agartharchides, Diodorus, and Seculius, the same way that they're referenced by other legitimate foreign people. Herodotus gives some description, claiming they were the swiftest runners known, spoke a unique language that no one else understood, and they ate serpents. Cool, huh? In the Herodotus account, written after Moses but before Christ, the troglodytes were nearly extinct, quote, hunted by the Garamantes people, unquote, which meant the troglodyte people might have existed in northern Africa near Libya. Strabo clouds things even further when he describes that the troglodyte as being people that lived in caves of Europe and Asia. Not only is that a large and ambiguous range, but it also gives us 3 continents of existence. Josephus's account connects the troglodytes to the subcontinent of the Middle East, which means this obscure tribe was either the most nomaderific of all nomad tribes, or there was something more substantial to them. In Genesis 25, we get a relatively obscure passage describing how Abraham gets himself a new wife after Sarah dies. We all know how Ishmael became the father of a mighty nation that later became Islam, and how Isaac became the father of a mighty nation that later became Israel and the Jews. But it turns out Abraham has a 3rd branch of his family tree. Verse 1. Now, Abraham had taken another wife, named Keturah, and she bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were the Ashurites, the Letushites, and the Leumites. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. All these were the descendants of Keturah. So, Keturah gives him 6 sons, one of which is named Midian, who gives Abraham 5 grandsons. And we don't hear from them for almost 6 centuries. We don't know how Josephus's cataclysm affected them, nor do we know what happened historically. If 70 Hebrews became 600,000 in the course of 430 years, the full strength of Keturah's nation could be impressive. Now, I found a few nuggets in the line of Keturah. Epher, who is a grandson and son of Midian, reportedly left home and invaded Libya, which explains why the Garamantes people were still trying to wipe them out 1,000 years later. Epher is the root for the word Africa, according to the internet, with the word Ifri becoming Africa, while also referencing the fact that Epher was a cave dweller. Also remember that the Ethiopian version of the Genesis story has Adam and Eve living in the Cave of Treasures upon the holy mountain of God. I'd really love to understand more about the troglodytes, because it appears as if the only thing uniting them is religion and language. Religion? Remember when Moses saves the girls at the well? They take Moses to their father, Jethro, also called Reuel, who is already described as a priest, the word was Cohen, of Midian. Remember, the Hebrews do not even have an official priestly order yet. They will in about 40 years with the establishment of the Levites, but at the time of the well, it doesn't exist yet. Nor do we have any Levitical laws. Yet Jethro shows up out of the blue and is already a priest. Now, I know this is speculation, but wouldn't it be cool if all the troglodytes spread across the world were a religious order? Think about it. In the legend of the Holy Mountain of God, which was Adam and Eve's second home, that's the Ethiopian Genesis I was referencing, they lived in a cave. Mount Horeb has a cave. What if they were like monks that spread out, fruitful and multiplying, across the world, still spoke the pre-Babel language, and were just shepherds for wayward travelers, like the Templars, without all the occult baggage? Boot camp. Even though we don't know how Jethro became a priest, we do know that Moses stays in Midian for the next 4 decades. Moses returns to Egypt at the ripe old age of 80, married and with children. Here's how it's described. Exodus 2, chapter 15. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and filled the troughs to water their father's flocks. And the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them, and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel their father, he said, How is it that ye are come so soon today? And they said, An Egyptian delivered us out of the hands of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flock. And he said unto his daughters, And where is he? Why is it that ye have left the man? Call him, that we may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man. And he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter, and she bare him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. And he lived happily ever after. Almost. My assumption used to be that Jethro was older than Moses. But you need to remember that Moses returns to him following the crossing of the Red Sea. So he can't be too much older than Moses at this point. Another strange thing that can be missed here is the pace of the marriage. Now, looking at Exodus chapter 2:21, it seems as if Jethro rewards Moses with a spare daughter. But a couple chapters later, in chapter 4:21, we have a strange scene involving Zipporah circumcising her sons. Wait, how old were her sons? Circumcising anyone beyond the age of a newborn seems a bit rough, but snipping a man at the age of 37 would be very weird. Plus, only dependent children would need to accompany mom and dad back to Egypt. Grown children over the age of 10 would have just stayed with Jethro. Little kids would need their mother. The sons of Moses appear to be little. But that makes a strange point. Moses did not have a child for 3 decades? How long did he wait to marry Zipporah then? So the timeline found in verse 21 might be a bit compressed, which I like. The reason why I like this is because Moses needs some spiritual training. Thanks to the education provided by Nefertiti, he has the capacity to lead a nation. But with Jethro, he has an old school priest who can teach him the mysteries of the faith. Jethro the troglodyte does not just have any territory either. He has the holy mountain of God, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai. It almost seems as if Jethro was looking for Moses. Later, after the divine battle takes place, the 10 plagues, Jethro greets Moses and the two share a moment together. Chapter 18, verse 9. And Jethro rejoiced over all the good things the Lord had done for Israel. This guy is a friend and ally. Moses not only shares the gospel, but he leaves his wife and kids with Jethro. His reasons are never clearly stated. It makes sense that Moses would not want his bloodline worshipped as kings after his death. Or it could be something for Grandpa Reuel. What if Gershom and Eleazar also became troglodyte priests? How cool would that be? Coincidentally, the Druze religion claims that Jethro is their great patriarch. Although I wish this religion was some unmolested ancient version, unchanged by man since the days of the troglodytes, this does not seem to be the case. It is neither Judaism nor Islam, with a few other concepts thrown in. It is still active, yet minimal. But what I like about it is that it does show the priesthood did not stop with Jethro. It continued. And somewhere, the descendants of Moses are out there. End of the exile. So after spending his years 40 through 80 in Midian, Moses is stolen out of exile to finally fulfill his destiny. Exodus chapter 2, verse 23. After a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned and cried out under their burden of slavery, and their cry for deliverance from bondage ascended to God. So God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He saw the Israelites and took notice. So, what happened in Egypt during those 40 years? I assume, for the first few years, Horemheb continued to unsuccessfully search for Moses. He would have asked his henchmen to search. It probably consumed him. Now, one of the main reasons I picked the Ramses theory is that the threat spans 40 years. Yes, there were other pharaohs that ruled for a long time. Tutmosis III ruled for 54 years, which is almost too long, whereas others ruled for just a few short years before dying and passing the torch. Horemheb takes over when Moses is at the right age, rules for a long time, yet passes his throne to his henchmen rather than his heir. When Moses was 40, Horemheb was in his prime, with Vizier Ramses I and General Seti at his side. The new pharaoh of the 10 plagues was not born yet. Now, Ramses I, the elder Ramses, his reign is so brief that some question if he ruled at all. His son, Seti, other spots refers to him as Sethos, takes over afterwards. But having been a rival of Moses, a contemporary of Moses, God does not recall his champion. Heck, he is even named after the god of evil, Seth. Pharaoh Seti rules for about 14 of the 40 years, and upon his death, God gives Moses the all clear. The new pharaoh, that would be Ramses II, at the ripe age of 16. He never met Moses. He most likely never heard of Moses, since the records were undoubtedly erased by Team Thebes over the past 4 decades. Bush or angel? So Moses goes back. There are a few nuggets I'd like to talk about in his commission and his trek back. Verse 1. Meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from within a bush. Moses saw the bush ablaze with fire, but it was not consumed. So Moses thought, I must go over and see this marvelous sight. Why is the bush not burning up? When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, he answered. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the affliction of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their oppressions, and am aware of their sufferings. I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen how severely the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore go, I am sending you to Pharaoh, to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses asked God, Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? I will surely be with you, God said, and this will be the sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, all of you will worship God on this mountain. Then Moses asked God, Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, What is his name? What should I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also told Moses, Say to the Israelites, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is how I am to be remembered in every generation. Go, assemble the elders of Israel, and say to them, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I have surely attended to you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And as I have promised to bring you out of your affliction of Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to what you say, and you must go with them to the king of Egypt and tell him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now, please let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness, so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not allow you to go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders I will perform among them. And after that, he will release you. And I will grant this people such favor in the sight of the Egyptians, that when you leave, you will not go away empty-handed. Every woman will ask her neighbor, and any woman staying in her house, for silver and gold jewelry and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters. So you will plunder the Egyptians. Now, let's take a look at a few of those key verses in there. For example, 3:1. Notice that there was an angel standing there. An angel. It stood near the bush, yes, but the angel was burning, not the bush. The bush did not burn, despite the presence of the angel. It was a burning angel next to a non-burning bush. In other words, it was not a regular fire. Let's look at chapter 3, verse 8 also. Again, the plan. It wasn't just about freedom. God had a purpose. He needed them to take back Canaan from the bad guys. The purpose was to purge Canaan, which everybody, Hebrews, Egyptians, and Canaanites, were surprised when Moses did not lead them directly into battle in Canaan. Verse 14, the name. In Egyptian culture, there were 5 aspects of being that defined a human. The Ak, Ba, Ka, name, and shadow were all part of your identity. The entire basis of mummies comes from that concept. When Team Thebes took over, they tried to kill Nefertiti twice by destroying her corpse, her statues, and chiseling out her name. Now, Just like our book of life, described in the book of Revelation, the Egyptians believed your name needed to be written down in order to achieve immortality. Pharaohs would write their names upon the pyramids, I'd pick the first block on the bottom, to make sure their name would continue to exist. So when Moses asked God for his name, there was a cultural reason for this. Yet, God seems to sense this and responds coyly with, "I am." Was God serious? Because Moses quickly scribbled down, "I am," which became known as the holy name. Yet then God expands his identity by including the God of titles. Now, shortly after this, within a year or so, post crossing the Red Sea, God gives Moses and the Hebrews the 10 Commandments. With it, he drops commandment number 2, which is found in chapter 20, verse 7. "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain." To me, this is more than just cussing. The ancient Egyptians saw magic and power in names. And if they remained steadfast in this belief, they'd be wanting to use it for spells and such, like they did in Egypt. So was "I am" an actual proper name? The Hebrews seem to believe so, which is why they developed the concept of the tetragrammaton. Hard word to say, which is a law where Jews are forbidden from using or writing the holy name Moses asked about. To avoid writing the word, the Hebrews wrote it in only consonants, YHWH. Now, there's a whole Y versus J debate. I'm going to ignore that one for now. As an English speaker / reader, I see the holy name written down as capital LORD throughout the Bible. The Hebrews would also avoid speaking it aloud. And when they got to it in the text, they verbalized Adonai to keep the name holy. So if you put YHWH and Adonai together, you'd have the full word. But don't say it. God is either a big jokester and gave Moses a fake name, which Moses wrote down to revere later, or he gave them a legit name, "I am," with a warning and commandment about its use. How can we tell? Well, Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible and had bunches of opportunity to set the record straight. So what did he use? Oh dear, he used all sorts of names. From the plural Elohim to "I am," God has dozens of names and titles that Moses and other prophets use in the Old Testament and New Testament. Moses certainly mixed up his use of names, which in turn mixed me up a bit too. Because of the lack of clarity, early translators chose to respect the Hebrew tradition by not translating YHWH into an English word. Only in recent years have Christians insisted on using YHWH as a proper word, giving me a bit of anxiety. Better to err on the side of caution? Genesis 4:26 also gives me pause. Why do we get a big section on bad guys from the Cain line and then finish it with the idea that at that time men began to, quote, use the name of the Lord? Notice how Moses wrote Lord, capital L-O-R-D. Moses connected the secret "I am" response with the pre-flood world. However, I'm not sure if this is a good thing or a bad thing. The pre-flood world was evil and needed to be destroyed by a flood. Did they misuse the name, which is the reason for commandment number 2? Did the misuse of the name contribute to the state of the fallen world? Yes, you can spin this as worship, but then you're saying that Adam and Eve didn't worship God prior to that moment? My hesitation does not change my relationship with God, and if I'm wrong, fear of the Lord is not a bad thing. Let's just say I'm right, and commandment number 2 is not about misusing the specific I am name. Whoa. How do you misuse it? Is there power and magic in it? Remember, in Revelation chapter 3, verse 12, Jesus alludes to getting a new name. And then in Revelation chapter 19, verse 18, he has a name written upon his robe and thigh. A new world, a new name. Okay, let's get back to the calling. Exodus chapter 3, verse 17, which I already read. Notice how God does not include any names like the Anakim, the Zamzumim, Emim, or Horites. God mentions the humans, but not the other names. This is another reason why I think we're dealing with paranormal monsters rather than hill tribes. Verse 20, spoiler, I love how God ruins the suspense and establishes his omniscient ways by forecasting how everything is going down. And by the time you get to verse 22, notice the talk about plunder. Again, 40 years earlier, Moses could have created a civil war and stolen the throne for Team Delta, but that was not God's plan, nor was it God's need. He needed the Hebrews to clean up Canaan. Yet he rewards them with the wealth of Egypt. Milk, honey, and gold. All bait for humans who would need encouragement in the battle that was about to take place. I hope you've enjoyed episode 6 of Examining Moses by Jason Lee Willis. Check out my website or Facebook page, Jason Lee Willis Novels, for ordering the book or for more audio podcasts. The music you've been listening to today was provided by YouTube's audio library, including Epic Unease by Kevin MacLeod. Until next time,